It was a cold, rainy evening in the heart of New York City. The streets were slick with rainwater, reflecting the dim glow of streetlights and neon signs. People hurried past, their umbrellas bobbing like colorful mushrooms against the gray drizzle. Among them was Sarah Thompson, an ordinary woman in her mid-30s, making her way home after finishing another long shift at the local diner where she worked as a waitress. Sarah's life wasn't glamorous by any stretch of the imagination. She lived paycheck to paycheck, renting a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Manhattan. Her days were filled with serving coffee to grumpy customers, wiping down sticky tables, and listening to complaints about food that came out too salty or not warm enough. But despite all the challenges, Sarah had a kind heart and a quiet strength that kept her going. She believed in helping others whenever she could, even if it meant sacrificing something for herself. As she walked along the sidewalk, clutching her worn-out handbag tightly to shield it from the rain, something caught her eye. A small figure standing under a flickering streetlight up ahead. At first glance, it looked like a child, drenched from head to toe, shivering uncontrollably. The girl's clothes were torn and muddy, and her face was streaked with dirt and tears. Her arms were wrapped around herself as though trying to hold onto whatever warmth remained in her soaked body. Sarah slowed her pace, feeling a pang of concern rise in her chest. There was no one else around, just the steady patter of rain and the distant hum of traffic. Something about the sight tugged at her heartstrings. It felt wrong to leave this child alone in such weather. Taking a deep breath, Sarah approached, cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "Hey there," Sarah called out softly, careful not to startle the girl. "Are you okay?" The child didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned her head slightly, revealing wide, frightened eyes that seemed to search Sarah's face for answers, or perhaps safety. For a moment, Sarah wondered if the girl might run away or refuse to speak altogether. But then, after what felt like an eternity, the child gave a tiny nod. Relieved but still worried, Sarah knelt down so she could meet the girl at eye level. "Do you live nearby?" she asked gently, keeping her voice calm and reassuring. "Is someone waiting for you?" Again, the girl said nothing. This time, however, her silence spoke volumes. It was clear she was scared, lost, and possibly hurt. Without hesitation, Sarah slipped off her own jacket, the only protection she had against the biting wind, and draped it over the girl's trembling shoulders. "Here," Sarah said, offering a small smile. "Let's get you somewhere dry. And warm, okay? You shouldn't be out here in this weather." For a brief second, the girl hesitated, as though unsure whether to trust this stranger who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. But eventually, she nodded again, allowing Sarah to guide her toward a nearby bus stop bench. They sat together for a few moments while Sarah tried to assess the situation further. She glanced around, hoping to spot a parent frantically searching for their missing child. But the streets remained eerily empty save for the occasional car speeding past, its tires splashing through puddles. No one seemed to notice the two figures huddled together under the flickering light. Sarah knew she couldn't leave the girl here. Whoever she was, wherever she came from, she needed help, and fast. Making up her mind, Sarah stood up and extended a hand toward the child. "Come on," she said firmly, yet kindly. "We'll figure this out together." To her surprise, the girl took her hand without resistance. Together, they began walking back toward Sarah's apartment, each step bringing them closer to shelter but raising more questions than answers. Who was this mysterious child? Why was she alone in the middle of the night? And most importantly, how had she ended up in such a dire situation? Little did Sarah know this simple act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. As they disappeared into the shadows of the city, neither of them realized just how extraordinary this encounter truly was. For now, though, all that mattered was getting the girl to safety and finding a way to reunite her with whoever loved her enough to miss her. Back at Sarah's modest apartment, the heater buzzed softly as she ushered the girl inside. She grabbed a towel from the bathroom and handed it to her guest, urging her to dry off. Then she rummaged through her closet for some spare clothes, nothing fancy, just a pair of sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, but they would do for now. As the girl changed into the dry clothes, Sarah brewed a cup of hot cocoa, adding a generous spoonful of sugar to sweeten it. When she returned, she found the girl sitting quietly on the edge of the couch, her knees pulled up to her chest. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, taking in the mismatched furniture and faded curtains. Despite its simplicity, the apartment radiated warmth, a stark contrast to the cold, lonely streets outside. "Here you go," Sarah said, handing her the steaming mug. "This should help warm you up." The girl accepted it hesitantly, cradling the cup in her small hands. She took a tentative sip, her lips curling into the faintest hint of a smile as the warmth spread through her body. For the first time since meeting her, Sarah noticed a glimmer of relaxation in the girl's posture. Still, there was an air of mystery surrounding her. Every attempt Sarah made to ask questions about her name, her family, or how she ended up alone was met with silence. The girl simply shook her head or stared blankly at the floor, unwilling or unable to share details. Frustrated but determined not to push too hard, Sarah decided to try a different approach. She sat beside the girl on the couch and began telling stories, simple tales from her own childhood, funny mishaps from work, and even silly jokes she remembered from school. Slowly but surely, the tension in the room began to ease. Though the girl didn't say much, her guarded expression softened, and she occasionally let out a soft giggle when Sarah recounted particularly amusing anecdotes. By the time midnight rolled around, exhaustion had overtaken them both. Sarah tucked the girl into bed, pulling the blanket snugly around her shoulders. As she turned off the bedside lamp, she whispered, "Everything will be okay. I promise." And with that, the mysterious child drifted off to sleep, leaving Sarah to wonder about the secrets hidden behind those wide, fearful eyes. Whatever the truth was, one thing was certain: their paths crossing was no accident. The rain outside continued to pour relentlessly, tapping softly against the windows of Sarah's tiny apartment. Inside, the air was warm but heavy with unanswered questions. Sarah sat on the edge of her worn-out couch, staring at the sleeping child in her bed. The girl, still unnamed, looked peaceful now, her chest rising and falling steadily beneath the thick blanket Sarah had draped over her. But despite her calm appearance, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something big, something unusual was hidden beneath the surface. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 1 a.m., far too late to call anyone or take the girl anywhere. For now, the only option was to let her rest. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples as she tried to process everything that had happened. She wasn't used to surprises like this. Her life was predictable. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, repeat. Helping a lost child was not part of her usual routine. Yet here she was, playing caretaker to a mysterious stranger who seemed to carry more secrets than words. Deciding there was nothing else she could do for the moment, Sarah turned off the living room light and settled onto the couch with an old blanket. As she lay there in the semi-darkness, listening to the rhythmic patter of raindrops, her mind raced. Who was this girl? Why had no one come looking for her yet? And what kind of trouble might Sarah be getting herself into by taking her in? Morning came slowly, casting pale sunlight through the cracks in the blinds. Sarah woke up groggily, her body stiff from sleeping on the uncomfortable couch. She stretched and yawned, then turned her attention to the guest bedroom. To her relief, the girl was still asleep, curled up tightly under the blankets. Sarah decided to give her some time before attempting to wake her. Instead, she busied herself making breakfast, a simple meal of scrambled eggs and toast, and brewed another pot of hot cocoa. By the time the food was ready, the girl stirred awake. She blinked sleepily, her eyes adjusting to the daylight streaming into the room. When she saw Sarah standing in the doorway holding a tray of food, she hesitated for a moment before sitting up cautiously. "Good morning," Sarah said with a smile, setting the tray down on the bedside table. "I made you something to eat. Are you hungry?" The girl nodded shyly, her gaze fixed on the plate of steaming eggs and buttered toast. Sarah handed her a fork and watched as she began eating slowly, savoring each bite. Despite her guarded demeanor, it was clear she hadn't eaten properly in a while. Sarah felt a pang of sadness thinking about how long the girl might have been wandering alone before they crossed paths. Once the girl finished eating, Sarah cleared away the dishes and returned to sit beside her. "Do you feel better today?" she asked gently. Again, the response was a small nod, accompanied by a fleeting glance that hinted at gratitude. Determined to break through the silence, Sarah decided to keep talking. She told the girl about her job at the diner, describing the quirky regulars who visited every day and the occasional chaos of busy shifts. She shared funny stories about customers spilling coffee on themselves or arguing over whether pancakes tasted better with syrup or honey. At one point, she even mimicked the exaggerated expressions of a particularly dramatic customer, which earned her a quiet giggle from the girl. Encouraged by the reaction, Sarah kept going. She talked about growing up in a small town, her love for books, and her dream of traveling someday if she ever saved enough money. The girl listened intently, occasionally tilting her head as though trying to understand every word. Though she still didn't speak, her presence became less tense, more relaxed. As the hours passed, Sarah noticed subtle changes in the girl's behavior. She started making eye contact more often, her movements less hesitant. There were moments when she almost seemed ready to say something, but then she'd stop herself, retreating back into silence. It was frustrating, but Sarah refused to give up. She sensed that behind those guarded eyes was someone desperate to trust again. Later, that afternoon, Sarah decided to distract the girl with cartoons. She turned on the TV and flipped through channels until she found a cheerful animated show featuring talking animals. Together, they sat side by side on the couch, watching colorful characters dance across the screen. For the first time since bringing her home, Sarah saw the girl smile, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up her entire face. It was during these quiet moments that Sarah allowed herself to wonder about the girl's background. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something extraordinary about her. There was a certain elegance to her features, a poise in the way she carried herself despite her current state. Even her clothes, though torn and dirty, appeared to be made of high-quality fabric. These details nagged at Sarah's mind, raising suspicions she couldn't quite explain. Still, she pushed those thoughts aside for now. What mattered most was ensuring the girl felt safe and cared for. Whatever secrets she carried, they could wait until later. As evening approached, Sarah realized she needed to start figuring out how to reunite the girl with her family. She rummaged through the pockets of the girl's damp jacket, hoping to find some clue, a name, an address, anything that might help identify her. At first, all she found were scraps of tissue paper and a crumpled receipt from a fancy restaurant. But then, tucked inside a hidden pocket, she discovered a small pendant on a delicate chain. The pendant was engraved with an intricate logo, a stylized letter C surrounded by swirling patterns. Sarah examined it closely, her brow furrowing. Something about the design looked familiar, though she couldn't place it immediately. She held it up to the light, studying the craftsmanship. It was clearly expensive, far beyond anything Sarah could afford. Her curiosity deepened, but she decided not to dwell on it for now. Instead, she slipped the pendant into her own pocket, resolving to look into it further once the girl was settled. Turning her attention back to the present, Sarah suggested they visit a nearby community center known for assisting families and children in need. "We can ask people there if they recognize you," she explained gently. "Maybe someone knows where you belong." The girl didn't protest, though her expression grew wary. Sarah reassured her, promising that they would stay together throughout the process. With that, they bundled up in dry clothes and stepped back out into the city, leaving behind the cozy confines of Sarah's apartment. The community center was bustling with activity when they arrived. Volunteers bustled around, organizing supplies and greeting visitors. Sarah approached the front desk, explaining their situation to a kind-faced woman named Linda. While Linda jotted down notes, Sarah noticed several posters plastered on the walls, missing persons flyers featuring photos of children and adults alike. One particular flyer caught her eye. It depicted a young girl with strikingly similar features to the one standing beside her. The caption read, "Missing. Emma Carter, age 10, last seen wearing blue dress." Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Could it be? Was this the same girl? Before she could fully process the revelation, Linda gasped loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "Oh my goodness," the volunteer exclaimed, pointing at the girl. "You're Emma Carter. Your picture has been everywhere." For a split second, the world seemed to stand still. Sarah stared at the girl, Emma, in disbelief. This wasn't just any lost child. This was the daughter of Richard Carter, one of the wealthiest men in New York City. Suddenly, everything clicked. The elegant posture, the expensive pendant, the sense of mystery surrounding her. Before Sarah could react, Linda rushed to alert the authorities. Within minutes, police cars and black SUVs surrounded the building. Men in suits poured out, scanning the area until they spotted Emma. One of them approached Sarah, his expression unreadable. "Miss Thompson?" he asked. "We need to speak with you." And just like that, Sarah's ordinary life collided head-on with the extraordinary. While Sarah and Emma were making their way to the community center, miles away in a luxurious penthouse overlooking Manhattan, Richard Carter paced back and forth like a caged lion. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, and his usually immaculate suit was rumpled, a rare sight for someone known as one of the most powerful men in New York City. Emma had been missing for over 24 hours now, and every passing second felt like an eternity. It all started with what should have been a simple family outing, a visit to Central Park followed by lunch at an upscale restaurant. But somehow, amidst the chaos of bustling crowds and distracted moments, Emma had slipped away unnoticed. The time Richard realized she wasn't beside him, it was too late. She was gone. The billionaire's empire spanned industries ranging from technology to real estate, but none of his vast resources could prepare him for the terror of losing his only child. He had spent the entire day on phone calls, coordinating efforts between private investigators, security teams, and law enforcement agencies. Posters bearing Emma's picture had flooded social media platforms, news outlets, and even billboards across the city. A hefty reward had been announced for anyone who could provide information leading to her safe return. Yet despite all these measures, there was still no sign of her. Every lead turned out to be a dead end. Each false alarm left Richard more desperate than before. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, completely unable to control the situation unfolding around him. His wife, Margaret, sat quietly in a corner of the room, clutching a tissue in trembling hands. Unlike Richard, whose frustration manifested as anger, Margaret's despair was silent and suffocating. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she barely spoke unless prompted. Their marriage had always been strained, but this tragedy brought them together in a shared agony neither of them could escape. As night fell once again, Richard's phone buzzed incessantly with updates from his team. Most of the messages contained discouraging news, no sightings reported, witnesses uncooperative, or trail going cold. But then, just as hope seemed to fade entirely, a single message lit up his screen. Potential match identified at a community center. Downtown. Authorities en route. Richard froze, his heart skipping a beat. Could it really be her? Was this the breakthrough they had been praying for? Without wasting another second, he grabbed his coat and headed toward the door. Margaret followed, closely behind, her steps hesitant but determined. Meanwhile, at the community center, Sarah found herself surrounded by chaos. Police officers and men in dark suits swarmed the area, barking orders and securing the perimeter. Emma clung tightly to Sarah's hand, her earlier confidence replaced by wide-eyed fear. Despite the commotion, Sarah remained calm, shielding the girl from prying eyes and harsh voices. One of the suited men approached them, flashing a badge that read, FBI. His tone was firm but not unkind. "Ms. Thompson, we need you to come with us," he said, gesturing toward a waiting SUV parked outside. "We'll explain everything shortly." Sarah nodded, though her mind raced with questions. What exactly was happening? Who were these people? And why did they seem so intent on taking Emma and her away? Before climbing into the vehicle, Sarah glanced down at Emma, who looked up at her with pleading eyes. "It's okay," Sarah whispered reassuringly. "I'm here with you. Nothing bad is going to happen." The ride to Richard Carter's penthouse was tense and silent. Sarah stared out the window, watching the city blur past in streaks of light and shadow. Her thoughts swirled chaotically. Only hours ago, she had been living her ordinary, predictable life. Now she was caught in the middle of something far bigger than she could comprehend. When they arrived at the towering skyscraper that housed Richard's residence, Sarah felt dwarfed by its sheer size and opulence. The lobby gleamed with polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers, and uniformed staff members stood at attention as they entered. An elevator whisked them upward to the top floor, where double doors opened into a sprawling apartment filled with modern art, plush furniture, and panoramic views of the city skyline. Richard and Margaret were waiting anxiously inside, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. When they saw Emma step forward, tears streamed down Margaret's face as she rushed to embrace her daughter. Richard hung back slightly, his jaw clenched as if holding back emotions he rarely showed in public. For a moment the room fell silent except for Margaret's sobs and Emma's quiet sniffles. Then finally Richard cleared his throat and turned his attention to Sarah. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my daughter's life." Sarah shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. She hadn't expected gratitude or recognition of any kind from someone like him. I just did what anyone would do," she stammered, unsure how to respond. But Richard shook his head firmly. "Not everyone would have taken the risk you did," he replied. "Not everyone would have cared enough." Margaret joined him, wiping her tears with a shaky hand. "We can never repay you for bringing our baby girl back to us," she added softly. Despite their heartfelt words, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong in this world of wealth and privilege. Everything about the Carters' lifestyle was foreign to her. Their elegant home, their tailored clothes, their guarded demeanor. Yet for some reason, they seemed genuinely grateful for her actions. Over the next hour, Sarah recounted the events of the previous night, explaining how she had found Emma alone on the street and taken her in without knowing who she was. Richard listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When she mentioned finding the pendant in Emma's pocket, Richard's expression softened further. "That necklace belonged to Emma's grandmother," he explained. "It's been in our family for generations." Hearing this, Sarah pulled the pendant from her pocket and handed it to him. As he examined it, his fingers brushed against hers briefly, an accidental touch that carried unexpected weight. For a fleeting moment, Sarah wondered if he saw her differently now, not as a stranger but as someone who had played a crucial role in saving his family. After the initial shock wore off, Richard insisted on rewarding Sarah for her bravery and compassion. He offered her a check on the spot, but Sarah refused immediately. "I didn't do this for money," she said firmly. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." Richard respected her decision, but made it clear that his gratitude wouldn't end there. Before leaving, he promised to stay in touch and ensure she received proper compensation for her kindness. Though Sarah tried to protest deep down, she knew arguing with someone like Richard Carter was futile. As she stepped back into the rainy streets later that evening, Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief washed over her knowing Emma was safe, but also a lingering sense of unease about what had just transpired. She couldn't deny that her life had changed forever, though whether for better or worse remained to be seen. And as the city lights flickered above her, Sarah realized one undeniable truth. Sometimes acts of kindness lead to outcomes far beyond what we imagine. The days that followed Emma's return were a whirlwind of activity for the Carter family, and for Sarah. While Richard and Margaret focused on reuniting with their daughter, ensuring her safety, and dealing with the aftermath of her disappearance, Sarah found herself caught in a strange limbo. On one hand, she was relieved that Emma was back where she belonged. On the other, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had been irrevocably altered by the events of the past few days. Richard Carter kept his promise to stay in touch. The day after Emma's rescue, He sent a car to pick Sarah up from her apartment. Though she initially protested, insisting she didn't need any special treatment, she eventually relented when the driver explained it was simply a courtesy. When she arrived at the penthouse again, Richard greeted her warmly, inviting her into his study for a private conversation. "I wanted to thank you personally," he began, his tone sincere but tinged with authority. "What you did, not many people would have gone out of their way like that." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in the plush leather chair across from him. She wasn't used to being treated with such formality or respect. "I just did what anyone else would have done," she replied softly, repeating the same words she'd said countless times since the night she found Emma. Richard leaned forward, slightly resting his elbows on the desk. "That's exactly my point," he said. "You didn't hesitate. You didn't ask questions. You acted selflessly, even though you didn't know who Emma was, or who I am." His gaze bore into hers, and for a moment Sarah felt exposed, as though he could see straight through her modest protests. But instead of making her uncomfortable, his words sparked something unexpected within her, a sense of validation. For years, she'd struggled to make ends meet, often wondering if her efforts mattered in the grand scheme of things. Yet here was one of the most powerful men in the world telling her, not asking her, that what she'd done mattered. "Look," Richard continued, leaning back in his chair, "I want to make sure you're taken care of. Not because I owe you anything, but because you deserve it." Before Sarah could protest, he handed her an envelope. Inside was a check written out to her name, the amount far exceeding anything she'd ever imagined earning in a lifetime. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the numbers, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "No," she said firmly, pushing the envelope back toward him. "I can't accept this." Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her refusal. "Why not?" he asked. "You earned it." Sarah shook her head, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "It doesn't feel right," she admitted. "I didn't do it for money. I did it because—" She trailed off, searching for the right words. Because it was the right thing to do. Though Richard respected her principles, he wasn't about to let her walk away empty-handed. "Then consider it a gesture of gratitude," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Use it however you see fit, to pay off debts, buy a new home, start fresh, whatever you need." Reluctantly, Sarah accepted the check, knowing there was no use fighting against someone as determined as Richard Carter. Still, the weight of it felt heavy in her hands, almost as though it carried more significance than just financial security. It represented a turning point in her life, a moment when kindness led to opportunities she never dreamed possible. While Sarah grappled with her newfound wealth, Richard turned his attention to uncovering how Emma had ended up lost in the first place. He assembled a team of investigators to piece together the details of her disappearance, determined to leave no stone unturned. What they discovered shocked even him. According to surveillance footage from Central Park, Emma had wandered off during the family outing, seemingly distracted by a street performer juggling colorful balls. At first glance, it appeared to be an innocent mistake, a child's curiosity getting the better of her. However, further investigation revealed something far more sinister. As Emma moved deeper into the park, she was approached by a man claiming to be a friend of the Carters. Witnesses described him as well-dressed and polite, someone who seemed trustworthy at first glance. He convinced Emma to follow him, promising to take her back to her parents. Instead, he led her to a waiting car and drove off before anyone realized what had happened. The man's identity remained unknown, but evidence suggested he may have been working for rivals, hoping to exploit Richard's vulnerabilities. In the world of high-stakes business, enemies lurked around every corner, and Richard had made more than his fair share over the years. Whether the kidnapping attempt was meant as leverage or revenge, it underscored the dangers of living in the spotlight. When Richard shared these findings with Margaret, she broke down in tears once again. The thought of losing their daughter to such calculated cruelty was unbearable, but Richard refused to let fear dictate their lives. Instead, he vowed, to strengthen their security measures and ensure nothing like this ever happened again. Emma, meanwhile, struggled to adjust to being home. Though physically unharmed, the trauma of her ordeal lingered. She became withdrawn, avoiding conversations and retreating into herself whenever strangers entered the room. Only Sarah seemed able to break through her defenses. Recognizing the bond between them, Margaret invited Sarah to visit regularly, hoping her presence might help Emma heal. Sarah agreed, finding herself drawn to the girl despite their vastly different worlds. During these visits, they talked about everything from school assignments to favorite foods, slowly rebuilding the trust shattered by Emma's experience. One afternoon, while playing board games in the penthouse living room, Emma finally opened up about her time on the streets. She recounted how scared she'd been, wandering aimlessly until Sarah found her under the flickering streetlight. "I thought no one cared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But then you came." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she hugged the girl tightly. "Of course I cared," she said. "And so does your family. We all love you, Emma." As weeks passed, Sarah began using the money Richard had given her to transform her life. She paid off her mounting debts, purchased a small house in a quiet neighborhood, and even enrolled in online classes to pursue a degree in social work, a field she'd always been passionate about but never had the means to explore. Despite her growing independence, she remained humble, refusing to let her newfound status change who she was at her core. Meanwhile, Richard continued to express his gratitude in ways both big and small. He offered Sarah a position at his company, recognizing her integrity and compassion as qualities he valued deeply. Though hesitant at first, Sarah eventually accepted, realizing it was an opportunity to make a real difference, not just for herself, but for others too. Through it all, the connection between Sarah and the Carters only grew stronger. They weren't just employer and employee or benefactor and beneficiary. They were a makeshift family brought together by fate and forged through shared experiences. And as they looked toward the future, they knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness create ripples that extend far beyond what we can imagine. Life had a way of surprising Sarah Thompson. Just months earlier, she was a struggling waitress trying to make ends meet in a small apartment on the outskirts of Manhattan. Now she found herself living in a cozy house with a steady job at one of the most prestigious companies in New York City. Her days of scraping by were over, replaced by newfound stability and purpose. Yet despite all the changes, Sarah remained grounded, focused not on what she gained but on how she could use her opportunities to help others. Her role at Carter Enterprises wasn't glamorous or high profile. Instead of working directly under Richard Carter, she joined the company's community outreach division, where she coordinated programs aimed at supporting vulnerable children and families. It was a position that aligned perfectly with her values, allowing her to turn her compassion into action. Every day she worked tirelessly to ensure that kids like Emma didn't fall through the cracks, a cause she believed in wholeheartedly. Richard kept his promise to stay involved in Sarah's life, often checking in to see how she was adjusting. At first, their interactions felt formal, almost awkward, but as time went on, they developed a genuine rapport. Richard admired Sarah's humility and dedication, qualities he rarely encountered among his colleagues. For her part, Sarah came to see him not just as a billionaire tycoon, but as a father who loved his daughter deeply and would do anything to protect her. Emma, too, played a key role in bridging the gap between their two worlds. She adored Sarah, frequently asking her parents if she could visit during weekends or holidays. Margaret welcomed these visits, grateful for the positive influence Sarah had on her daughter. Slowly but surely, Emma began opening up again, regaining the confidence she'd lost during her traumatic ordeal. By the end of the year, she was back to being the bright, curious child she'd always been, thanks in large part to Sarah's unwavering support. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah received an email from Richard inviting her to attend a gala, hosted by Carter Enterprises. The event was meant to celebrate the launch of a new foundation dedicated to helping missing children reunite with their families, a project inspired by Emma's rescue. Though flattered, Sarah hesitated before accepting. She wasn't comfortable attending fancy events, especially ones filled with wealthy elites sipping champagne and exchanging business cards. But when Richard personally called to insist, she reluctantly agreed. The night of the gala arrived sooner than expected. Dressed in a simple yet elegant gown borrowed from Margaret, who insisted it suited her perfectly, Sarah stepped into the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting shimmering reflections across the polished, marble floor. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres while guests mingled beneath towering floral arrangements. Sarah felt out of place amidst the opulence, clutching her clutch nervously as she scanned the room. Then she spotted Richard standing near the stage, deep in conversation with several executives. Catching sight of her, he excused himself and walked over, his expression softening into a warm smile. "You look amazing," he said sincerely, offering his arm. "Come on, I want you to meet someone." Before Sarah could protest, he led her toward a group of reporters gathered near the podium. Cameras flashed as Richard addressed the crowd, thanking everyone for their contributions to the foundation. Then, without warning, he turned to Sarah. "This woman is the reason we're here tonight," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "Sarah Thompson showed me, and all of us, that true strength lies in kindness. Without her bravery, my daughter wouldn't be standing beside me right now." A hush fell over the audience as dozens of eyes turned toward Sarah. She felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, unsure what to say. Thankfully, Richard continued speaking, sharing the story of how Sarah had found Emma and cared for her until they were reunited. As he spoke, Sarah noticed tears glistening in Margaret's eyes and Emma beaming proudly from the front row. When Richard finished, the room erupted into applause. Several guests approached Sarah afterward, congratulating her and expressing admiration for her actions. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly seen, not as a waitress or a struggling single woman, but as someone capable of making a difference. In the weeks following the gala, Sarah's work at Carter Enterprises gained recognition beyond what she ever imagined. Media outlets picked up the story of Emma's rescue, highlighting Sarah's role in saving the billionaire's daughter. Requests for interviews poured in, but Sarah declined them all, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. Still, the attention brought unexpected benefits. Donations flooded into the foundation, enabling it to expand its reach and impact countless lives. Meanwhile, Sarah's bond with the Carters grew stronger than ever. They invited her to family dinners, holiday celebrations, and even vacations at their summer home in the Hamptons. Though their lifestyles couldn't have been more different, they shared a mutual respect and affection that transcended wealth and privilege. For Emma, having Sarah around became a source of comfort and joy. She looked up to her as both a mentor and a friend, often seeking her advice on everything from school projects to personal dilemmas. In return, Sarah taught her valuable lessons about empathy, resilience, and the importance of giving back to the community. As the years passed, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She never could have predicted the twists and turns her life would take after finding a lost girl on a rainy night. What started as a simple act of kindness had transformed into something far greater, an opportunity to create lasting change. Through it all, she remained humble, reminding herself daily that none of this would have happened without the courage to follow her instincts. Whether serving coffee at a diner or coordinating programs for disadvantaged youth, Sarah stayed true to her core belief that everyone deserves a chance to feel safe, loved, and valued. And so, as she stood on the balcony of her new home one evening watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sarah smiled. The road ahead wasn't always easy, but she faced it with hope and determination. After all, she knew better than anyone that even the smallest acts of kindness could lead to extraordinary outcomes. For Sarah, the greatest reward wasn't the money, the job, or the recognition. It was knowing she had made a difference in someone's life. And as long as she lived, she vowed to keep doing just that. Because sometimes the simplest choices, like stopping to help a shivering child under a flickering streetlight, are the ones that change the world.